Hi, it's Dennis Daly. In one way or another, I've been a journalist all my life. That's when I found that I had the chance to go to the little town of Auburn, Nebraska years ago and interview the editor of 2 weekly newspapers. I knew I would find out about what small-town journalism was like, and I found it very refreshing. Talking to the man who owned the papers, Mark Cramer, I asked him where he was from originally.
Wayne, Nebraska is my hometown. That's in the northeast corner of the state. And I grew up in a newspaper family. My grandfather was a newspaper man. My father still is a newspaper man to some degree, and I think I've got printer's ink in my blood. And it's a horrible disease, my wife says. But
you can't get it out, I know that.
It won't go away. I've tried washing it out, rubbing it out, it just refuses to go anyplace.
Let's put the area here in perspective. We're in the town of Auburn, which I understand is really a consolidation of 2 small towns. What was the town originally called? It's two pieces, and when did it all come together?
Well, I'm a little new to the area. I've only been here a little over a year, but there used to be a town called Calvert and a town called Sheridan, and they were right next to each other, and the 2 formed together. Oh, I don't know how long ago. It was over 100 years ago. Thinking to, as I've been told, I'm not up in my history so well, but to get first the county seat away from Brownville, Nebraska, which is the oldest town in the state, and 10 miles down the road, and eventually become capital of the state of Nebraska. The capital part didn't work. Lincoln is the capital, but they're still we're still the county seat, and probably will be, considering they built the courthouse here, and they're kind of expensive to build now.
What are the names of the 2 papers you publish, and how often are they published?
Okay, we've got the Nemaha County Herald, and that comes out every Friday, and the Auburn Press Tribune, which is every Tuesday. And basically they're the same newspaper, same staff, just under different names. At one time they had different ownerships, and in the 50s they came under one roof, and I believe they kept the names separate because at one time newspapers got a lot of national advertising, and now newspapers don't get, or local newspapers, community newspapers don't get that anymore. But when there was the 2 newspapers, they would get the advertising on Tuesday from Winston or Levi's or whoever, and get the same advertisement on Friday and get double income. And they used to have 2 different subscriber base. Now it's all the same. It would probably be more profitable for me to bring them under one roof, so to speak, and with one name. But the town refers to them as such, and I would be wrecking a piece of history.
Well, there's that joke about what do you do when you over-consolidate. You end up with the Cleveland Plain Dealer, Tribune, Herald, Chronicle, to put it all together. What would you call the paper if you, it wouldn't be too tough, but if you had to consolidate the names, which would go first?
I would probably just give it a very simple name, like the Nemaha County Herald, or possibly the Auburn Newspapers, which is what we call the whole group. I mean, when I write checks out and things, it's under the Auburn Newspapers. Our press cards, our business cards say the Auburn Newspapers, and in small print the names of the papers. It makes it a little simpler that way.
Well, you know, my last name being Daly, spelled correctly, D-A-I-L-Y. There is a small town in Massachusetts called Dennis, and I always thought it would be neat in my later years to start a newspaper called the Dennis Daily, and it would be published. It would be published by Dennis Daly, and I don't know whether anybody would get the joke or not. What's the circulation like?
Well, our market penetration here is quite good. About 90% of the homes get our paper. Our circulation varies between 3,300 to 3,500, depending on basically what's on the front page or what's in the court docket section.
You said the court docket there. There are 2 things I think a lot of people who live in urban areas don't know, and that is there are still a lot of weekly small-town newspapers. Some people live out in the suburbs of a metropolitan area, and that's kind of coming into vogue, that a suburb of Houston, for example, will have a small weekly newspaper if the advertising can handle it. But in many ways, the weekly or twice-weekly newspaper in a small town is more than the paper of record. It's where everything gets printed. It's where when the court has to advertise for something, that has to go in there. Mm-hmm. And were it not for that paper, a piece of government would have a difficult time operating.
Well, we do print all the legal notices, and they're an advertisement type of thing, but there's very little that goes on in this area, in this town, that at least I like to think that we miss. I mean, not only do we print all the government news, but we have things that some people refer to as gossip columns. So-and-so went to so-and-so's house for dinner, and people turn this in. And all the little towns, we've got correspondents who I shouldn't say little towns, small communities in this area who turn in that same kind of information. And so reading our paper, you'll find out who had dinner at whose house, who went visiting up in Lincoln, who had dinner across the street at the restaurant called the Corner Kitchen.
Well, and you'll see, for example, so-and-so's son was on leave from the Navy and spent the weekend here. But that is important news. I know after I moved to Washington, D.C., occasionally friends would come back to Indiana with me, and they would be listening to my hometown radio station and say, they're leading the newscast with who died. Well, you can't do obituaries in a big city. It would take an hour just to talk about who died, but the obituaries are quite often the most important thing.
The deaths go on the front page of the paper. In a community like Auburn, which has only about 3,500 people, the whole county, Nemaha County, only has around 7,000 people. People get to know each other after a while. The gentleman that I bought the newspaper from is now 78 years old, or I'm sorry, 77, and he had been here for 58 years at this newspaper.
Wow.
And he, if you look behind you over there, you'll see an old typewriter. He still writes some stories. He hasn't switched over to Macintoshes yet.
And probably won't.
Actually, he's very interested.
Really?
Yeah, he's one of the... his memory is better than any hard drive I've ever seen. People come up to him and will come in the paper and ask about so-and-so on the fire department in the 40s. And John, not only can he tell you who the man was and about his family, but he can narrow it down usually within a week or two, a story that ran about him.
And then you can look for it and find it.
Yeah, generally, yeah. We keep I've got every paper we've ever printed in a vault in the basement, so we can look all that up.
Because you have such close ties to a small area and because the focus is so local, I would guess that there's a lot more interaction between the people in the community and the paper than you would see, for example, for the Washington Post, which is this huge anonymous newspaper.
People are not afraid to come in. I mean, my office is right over there, and people just walk in if they've got a problem or need something done. And the editors sit right here, and they don't. Most folks don't check in at the front desk. They just kind of walk back and let us know. And they'll call you at home. A lot of times I'll be home at night, and someone will call me or tell me about something that's going on, or people don't tend to plan ahead very much when it comes to the paper. I've gotten calls at 11 o'clock from the local Eagles Club wanting me to come down and take a picture of some award that they'd forgotten to do it, and we generally do. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're community service.
I don't know where you're from originally, but where I grew up, we got several newspapers. We got the Indianapolis Star. Many of the neighbors got the Evansville, Indiana, or the Terre Haute paper, but everybody got my little hometown paper. It was published Monday through Saturday, no Sunday edition. But many people live in small rural towns where the newspaper only comes out once or twice a week. In Auburn, Nebraska, in the southeastern part of that state, there is a wonderful gentleman named Mark Cramer who, with his wife, publishes two newspapers. One comes out on Tuesday and one comes out on Thursday. Mark continued to show me around the newspaper offices and began to take me further and further back. And as we walked back into the offices, we walked back into the history of the way newspapers were printed.
Let's go back. Okay, in the original days of newspaper, the type was set. Individual letters were placed in trays. And Lord forbid if you dropped it on the floor, you've got the type here. Look at this.
Right
different
there.
Size. Oh. Good heaven! Oh, that's heavy.
Okay, we keep that. We still use some of this material. I've got type cases and type drawers. This is all hand carved wooden type, And you can see here I've got hundreds of...
Oh, good.
It goes all the way back there.
But the point of it is, before the invention of what was called the linotype machine, which actually used negative impressions and melted lead, and then it's set up very quickly, everything had to be done on presses. But then an offset came along, which basically takes a photograph of the page and prints from that. But what I was saying is when that technology became available, a lot of small town papers would go to the next largest city and have the paper actually printed there. But you're still printing it here.
Well, we have I have an offset press. Like I said, we'll go back there in a bit. But as you can see, we still do some commercial printing here, and these drawers of type. For some things that we do, this actually works better for some cards and some standing
It's
heads.
240 point or something. It's about 3 inches tall. There's a W over here that must be a foot tall. That's just, you can't get many of those on one page. That's beautiful.
No, but I've got a whole closet full of this. People are very interested. I give a lot of tours down here, and people are. I mean, everybody's seen a computer. Big deal. We sell our type on a computer. All the kids got them at school. Same stuff or better, and they love to see the old machinery and how it runs because it's fascinating.
Well, now, there's a W and there's an R, and I was just thinking the word war with an exclamation mark is about the only word to which you would dedicate the entire top half of the front page.
Well, it's possible. I haven't...
Or peace, maybe.
Yeah, or world at war, I suppose. Yeah. But here, if you want, you can have some. That's 100-year-old type. You can take that with you.
Thank you. A beautiful W, uppercase W.
Yeah, we let folks have these type that gets mashed or nicked over the years. We can't use it much anymore. Now, with the advent of linotype machines, which I have 2 back there, and Ludlow machines.
Did you ever think of opening a museum here?
That's exactly what I plan to do.
Oh.
In the future, sometime when I've got a little more money and can get the roof fixed and things, I'd like to turn this into a working museum. And with the old technology next to the new, people are so fascinated by that. One of those linotype machines still works. Yeah. Well, now
let me stop at this easel here. Easel's probably not the right. It's a slanted work table. This is laid out for classified ads, and what you have done is created the page out of pieces, pasted it up. Right. We used to run them through a waxer, which put stripes of wax on the back. Is
That's exactly what we do.
You've waxed this, okay?
Yeah.
And then basically it is the page that the person at home is going to see. It just needs to be photographed and turned into a plate.
Yeah, it's photographed and transferred to a plate. This is actually an outmoded technology now, and hopefully within the year we'll be going to a pagination process. We're using a page layout program like Quark Express is the one we're using. We'll be all paginated on a computer and come out printed looking like this, and then it'll be photographed and plated, and then eventually we'll go directly to plate. There's a process for that now. It's costly, but the way electronics are going, I mean, all these things have gotten much cheaper.
Well, when you think about it, let's talk about USA Today, which is compiled in a building about 3 blocks from where I live in Arlington, Virginia. That's all laid out and then sent via satellite to all these printing plants around the country, because there would be no way that the material could be shipped or dictated over the phone. But the finished page is sent, dropped my W, is sent electrically and then set up and printed.
Yeah, just sent over a modem. My plans as well to turn this into an electronic medium. There are newspapers all over the country that are online, and USA Today is one of them. And people who can access the newspaper via computer, and some that don't work yet. There's lots of software incompatibility still, and it's still new for us. I'm still learning the Macintosh, and as is my staff. The folks in my advertising department, they're learning new things all day, all the time, and we're trying to master Adobe Photoshop right now is our plan, and then we'll move on to something more difficult.
Let me tell a couple of secrets here. We're coming up on the old linotype machine, which is a huge, complicated, geared machine, but it was as much of a breakthrough in the composition as newspaper for its time as the computer is now. It allowed an operator with a keyboard to type the copy and turn it into type. with hot lead. The point I was going to make is it made one row of type for each line of typing, and occasionally if you ever see a line of type upside down in a newspaper, you'll know the fellow dropped some things and had a bad day.
That's called pied type, by the way.
Pied. Occasionally you'll see a county newspaper or even a daily newspaper, and you'll see some white over it. You'll see, boy, that looks like something fell on there, and that's what happened. Before it was photographed, a little piece of something else fell, or somebody's hair fell on it, and it gets photographed, and there's something missing. But you have to, you have to work so quickly, though. That's the other thing. Quite often.
Well, I grew up watching people use these type of machines and put it out, and it amazes me today. I mean, we think we work so hard getting the newspaper out on time and by our deadlines, but it's nothing like it used to be when you had these galleys full of hundreds of pounds, or I don't know how much some of them weighed, but the two strong guys would take to pick the things up and load them into the press. By the way, if you look back there, a press they used to print the paper on is right over there. It's too big to get out the door.
Yeah. The other thing about the linotype machine, because it had to melt lead, and here's a bar hanging into a pot where it melted, is they were so darn hot. And the linotype operators were usually in a poorly ventilated area, sitting side by side with these big machines, sweating, putting out the paper.
By the way, this machine was built around the turn of the century. This one was built in the 30s, and they were costly machines in these days. This machine, cost... in the 1930s, this machine was $30,000.
It'd be $1 million today.
Well, it would be.
By exchange standards.
There used to be 4 of them down here. And this one still works. Mr. Sanders, who I was telling you about, he operates this, and there's occasionally something... we get calls from around the country. People want something set, and that's what.
Well, it's a whole different look. That's the one thing. I think the casual observer may not know the difference, but you take a piece. It's hard, for example, if you have a newspaper copy from the 50s, because the paper has aged. But when that was crisp and new, the look on that more porous, more raggy kind of paper that regular printing would take, it had more of a, for want of a better word, a majestic look about it than what's today, which is just printing in some ways.
Yeah, it was a totally different look, and then you would see these slight imperfections all the way through that gave it some character, I believe. When I look at the papers, there's a character to the way the pages were put together, and it was a true work of craftsmanship. It really was. The fellow who had to operate this linotype, I mean, not only did they have to be an expert typist. I mean, it wasn't like you make a mistake and you can just press delete and highlight a word and press delete. I mean, it was a lot of time.
What did you do, throw out a whole row of type if you blew it?
Well, yeah, and you throw it back in the pot and melt her down later. And but you just couldn't delete it. I mean, after the proofreading went through. And so the fellows who operated these things, they had to be expert typists, and they also had to be a hell of a good mechanic.
To keep the machine going.
Because
there was that other little thing that also people don't think about, that awful, and I hated this word in college, justification, where the right end of the line has to be a vertical line, just as the left end does, and you get a word like pagination or something, or a 12 or 13 syllable word in the middle, and you try to figure out where to hyphenate it because they couldn't figure out how to squeeze it left and right to fit. And now computers, you push justification, it goes wham.
Yeah, and then you press the hyphenation tool and
spell check, which these poor fellows didn't have except for a dictionary and a good memory.
Well, spell check is it's a marvelous tool. Don't touch that, you'll get ink all over yourself. We have a leak in the roof and we have to use these plates.
We're in a newspaper office in Auburn, Nebraska. Mark Cramer is with us. He is the owner of the paper. It's published as 2 separate papers, once early in the week, one later in the week. He's been showing us almost the evolution of the newspaper in an office that is full of modern-day equipment and ancient newspaper equipment that someday, you say, hopefully will be a working museum.
People can see how it used to be to put out a newspaper, see the craftsmanship and the hard work involved, and they can see where it's come to now.
Yes, technology keeps improving in some ways, but not necessarily all for the good. When I was in journalism school, we didn't have computers yet. We had to use our noodle. We had to write it out, sometimes in longhand, usually on a typewriter that didn't correct itself, paste it up, and then switch it around. The copy looked awful. Until we saw it printed as the college newspaper. And then we felt pretty special about it. Mark Cramer and his two-county newspapers in Auburn, Nebraska are preserving that wonderful sense of achievement. There are wooden floors and old typewriters and linotype machines, ink and type and tradition everywhere. There is a sense of memory there. For those of us who love journalism, going to a small-town newspaper is in a way like going to Mecca. And meeting someone like Mark Cramer reminds us that to really do a good job, you do have to have printer's ink running through your veins. You see, not every newspaper can be the Washington Post or the New York Times, but Mark Cramer has his heart and soul in publishing those two little papers in Auburn, Nebraska. I'm Dennis Daly.